I remember having a walk with Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator. And although he was very excited about the idea of elastic sales and how we arrived there, he at some point corrected me and said, it's not really a pivot what you've done. What you've done is a jump. This is a completely different thing. If your energy and motivation and belief is not at a super high level every day, that's not going to be enough internal energy to do the work necessary to make a startup successful. So then it's time to move on.
Hey everybody, I'm Desiree Echeverria. I'm the senior content marketer at Close, and today I am once again joined by Steli Efti, the founder and CEO of Close, but also founder of startups past, including Super Cool School, maybe one of the best startup names ever, Swipe Good, Elastic Sales, and Close.io before it became Close.com, which brings me to our topic today, pivots. Pivoting your startup idea. And Steli is clearly no stranger to the pivot with that laundry list of startups past that are no longer with us. May they rest in peace. And I think pivots are becoming a hot topic once again. I've seen some really great new articles written recently about pivots. And I was reminded of some of my favorite pivots in history, like how YouTube used to be a video dating service, right? Which sounds like a nightmare to me, but that's how they started. Slack started out as a video game. Shopify began as a snowboarding store, kind of random. Netflix, probably one of the biggest pivots, happened right before our very eyes, pivoted from a DVD rental, company to a streamer / distribution. So is it safe to say, Steli, that most startups will have at least one major pivot at some point?
Yes, I think so. I was just pondering in my mind if it needs to be classified as most successful startups will have at least one pivot. Because there's definitely a lot of startups that never pivot and never deviate from their original plan. I'm sure there's going to be some successes that can be found within that group, but I'd be surprised if it's more than the ones that have to considerably change their original plans until they find success.
So there's a little bit of a debate over the definition of a pivot versus just completely throwing out your idea and starting over from scratch as a new business. And you've done both. And I don't want to get too into the weeds over the semantics of what is a pivot versus, what is. I just don't think that's the point. I think the point is being able to recognize when something's not working and having that realization affect your next move. So I want to talk about what it means to change plans when something's not working. So can you walk me through your evolution of all of your startup, let's say like closures and pivots and closures, all your moves that went from one startup to another?
I don't know if I can do that or if we have enough time for it, because even just with one startup, like the very first startup that I tried in Silicon Valley when I'd moved from Europe, there were so many. I mean, the original idea was that it would be an open website that's community based, maybe open sourced, sort of a la Wikipedia. And then Facebook launched its platform. This is eons ago, 2007. Most of you won't remember this, but Facebook was a big deal. They opened up to people that weren't just on college campuses and had a university email address. And then they opened up the website to build apps on it and to be able to get crazy distribution on it. This is prior to iPhones and smartphones, just to give people an idea of dating. And so I moved from like an open source website to an app that was built on the social network Facebook, to then getting contacted by some executive at Google who was saying, hey, I think it'd be a really cool tool if you develop that and we could internally have our engineers use this app that you've built on Facebook. So we pivoted to the enterprise, and I could go on for a good amount of time how many sort of switches we made and who we focused on. So I've had my fair share of switches, pivots, as well as complete reboots, from totally different companies with, the same company with a totally different brand, product and customer base, all the way to smaller deviations of like it's the same product, but it's focused on a different audience, right? We go from a social version of this product to now an enterprise version of this product to later a smartphone version of this product. All the way to what I said before, where it's like it's not even the same product, the same name, the same customer base at all. I've done them. I've done them all versions of pivots. And just as a little anecdote, when we went through Y Combinator, we originally started as this social giving app that would allow you to round up your purchases to the nearest dollar and give that change to a favorite charity of yours. When we moved or pivoted from that idea to elastic sales, I remember having a walk with Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, telling him about this and our motivations behind it, the reasons behind it, and also the early traction we had seen with elastic sales. And although he was very excited about the idea of elastic sales and how we arrived there, he at some point corrected me and said, it's not really a pivot what you've done. What you've done is a jump. To pivot, one of your feet still has to be at the same point on the ground, right? Like it's just this is not really qualifying as a pivot. This is a completely different thing. So I remember that moment clearly. So there's, that term can be overused, but there's all versions of this, and I've definitely gone through any and all of them.
So I was doing a little research on you, and I remember hearing that your first startup idea you had spent way too much time on. You had spent a few years sort of banging your head against the wall to try to make an idea work. And when you finally came to the conclusion that it just was not going to happen, it felt like a weight was lifted off your shoulders, and that sort of freed you up to go back to the drawing board with fresh eyes, new creativity, and then suddenly you come up with a new idea, and that's the idea that you move a lot faster on. Can you talk about how that experience, helped you in the future?
Yeah, this actually relates to the lesson that I'd learned with my prior startup, Super Cool School, really helped with the experience that we went through Swipe Good to then eventually become Elasticsearch and then close. Because with my first startup in the Valley, I did exactly what you said. I just was running harder and harder against the wall and thought that part of success and part of being a good entrepreneur and founder is to be so hard-headed that no wall can sort of withstand your will, right? That's kind of that's a very inspiring and romantic image of the hero that just walks through all the walls. But in reality,
You never give up.
yeah, you never give up. But in reality, as a founder, you need to find the door with your eyes versus just running with your head against the wall, because most walls will be harder than your head in the real world, right? So you can just like walk through walls. It's not that easy. And so you have to be clever. You have to use all of the devices of your internal and external resources, and using your eyes, your hands, your feet, using external tools to get through what you want to get through is all part of the game. You can't just be running through everything, just in a straight line. And so with that first startup, I was using just harder work, which usually meant more hours of work, right? Until I was working, from whatever it was, from like 9 a.m. in the morning to like 11 p.m. or midnight, 7 days a week, no breaks, no social life, no vacations, just longer and longer hours, feeling more and more miserable. And I felt that that was part of the game, part of what would make me ultimately earn any success that would come at the very end. And for that company, it was impossible for me to accept defeat psychologically and emotionally. It was very hard for me to say, this isn't working and I have to stop. But finally, when there was no more money, no more resources, no more energy, no more motivation, I had a meeting with the entire team and I proposed a vacation. And I said, all right, we'll take a break. Right now, we all are broke financially. We all have to take care of just bare minimum, being able to live, pay for our rent and for food. And so what we'll do is we'll take a break from this startup. Everybody gets to spend the next 3 months just landing on their feet, taking care of their own situation. And in 3 months, we're going to meet again right here. We're going to decide, do we want to do another run at this startup, or do we want to do this as a side business? What do we do with this? And the truth was that felt easier to announce. People also felt easier about that. Yeah, okay, we'll take a break and then we'll come back and we'll see what we do with this. But within a week, everybody knew nobody's coming back. This was over. This startup was dead. It was just very hard to admit that at that very moment. So, saying let's take a break and see how we feel in a couple of months was the out. And then I realized very quickly, okay, this thing is dead. I don't have the motivation, the passion anymore. We don't have the resources, so I have to move on. Now, forwarding ahead for when we started with SwipeGood, a lot of the lessons that I should have learned with my prior startup, and I just used sort of like raw will to try to accomplish things. Once the weight was off my shoulder with that prior company, actually a lot of lessons that I should have learned and applied all of a sudden sort of internalized. It was like an aha moment, like a waking up from a bad dream. I was like, oh, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here are all the things I was doing wrong. And here's sort of the remedy to these things. It was so clear. It became so clear to me how to run a startup and what I did wrong and what I should have learned. So when Anthony and I started working on SwipeGood, and then eventually Tom joined us, there were a lot of lessons learned, years of lessons acquired but not internalized yet, that I now was ready to put into practice. And so we had a great sort of kickstart with SwipeGood. We built a product very quickly. We got some initial traction really quickly. We got accepted into Y Combinator fairly quickly. We had more angel investor interest. We got some big partnership. Growth was up and to the right, 30% week over week was our growth rate. So that makes a nice little sort of hockey stick chart. On demo day at Y Combinator, after 3 months, we actually put our growth chart on our t-shirts at demo day, and we're talking to investors, arrogantly, confidently, and we're telling them, hey, I first talked to you wearing the t-shirt when the dot was here. Now it's up here. It's up to you. You can invest now or wait a year when, we're like up into the moon. And so we raised a very successful round at the time, a very large round at the time. Everything was going great until it wasn't anymore, right? Until sort of the first 4 or 5 months of growth were gone. And now the easy growth was sort of off the table. All the low-hanging fruit stuff was off the table. And our model wasn't working as well as it was in the beginning. And now what did I do? I did the same thing I did before, right? I started just getting more tense, working more hours, and wanting to force success, force growth back up and to the right. But what did my two co-founders do, Anthony and Tom? They just lost interest in this. They just started going, this is lame. It's not growing. It's not going well. What else could we be doing? And I started resenting them for that. So, and I remember there was a period of a couple of weeks where every day I had a sort of a 24/7 loop in my head of fighting with them and just telling them my opinion. Like, this isn't, I was like, these people don't know what entrepreneurship is. Entrepreneurship isn't just everything is easy. You have to go through difficult times, and then you have to persevere and work really hard and, make it happen. And I was really upset with them. And they were messing around, playing with different ideas and different, maybe we should build some other app. And I was like, are these people crazy? I'm going to kill them. Like, you can't just build another app. Until at a certain moment, I had an aha experience, and I realized, okay, wait a second. What I want to do is something I did for 5 years with my prior startup, and it never worked. It was just like work harder and try to force the issue. I've never succeeded with this. Maybe it's not me who's right, and these two co-founders are stupid. Maybe they're right, and I'm stupid. Maybe they're a bit more open-minded and flexible, and I'm hard-headed, and I'm just like now absolutely committed to this thing, no matter if it's working or not, no matter what the reality of the situation is. I try to like hold on to my idea of it. Maybe I should join their team instead of forcing them to think like me and act like me. And I decided to go, maybe I should just become more open-minded, and maybe we should try something different for a little while, because we had done a couple of things and none of them were working. And we did become more and more tense, and working together was less and less fun. And so we were going down a bad road. And so I proposed to them the idea of saying, hey, okay, the swipe good isn't going well, but there's enough things happening and enough sort of plans in place already for the next couple of months. Let's just reduce our workload from 100% swipe good to 50%. We'll keep maintaining what's going on right now. And then let's take the next 3 months, travel to 3 new cities. We'll rent out 3 different Airbnbs, and let's just play with new ideas. Let's get creative. Let's get out of this office that we've been living and sleeping and working in all day long, 7 days a week. Let's try to have a creative break from all of this. We'll keep maintaining swipe good, and everybody can pitch a certain idea. We do 3 different ideas in 3 different cities, and then we'll come back. We'll decide what we want to do. Do we want to go back to 100% focus on swipe good, or are we more excited about a new or different idea for the future? And that was the pitch. We got excited about that. It never got that far. We never got to 3 different cities with 3 different ideas, because before we even left for the first trip, I had the idea for Elastic Sales, for this sort of outsourced sales team on demand for B2B SaaS companies. You could just go online and say, spin me up a couple of sales reps as if it's servers on AWS from Amazon. So you could scale a sales force up or down and try different ideas, have them try different pitches, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I had that idea, Tom and Anthony got really excited about it and just started executing immediately. I was a bit more hesitant in the beginning. We might talk about this in a future episode, but eventually we started working on Elastic Sales. We got a good amount of traction. And so on our first stop, I think it was Austin, Texas, actually, we started, we had already a couple of startups that wanted to use our MVP, and we started to do sales campaigns and charge customers and building a pipeline and start building a first version of the software that eventually became Close. And by the time we were back, we had sort of revenue growth. We had an MVP of a product with some exciting responses and insights from the market. And that's when the meeting happened at Y Combinator with Paul Graham. And we told him about this pivot that we're thinking about. And he was like, all right, let's go. So the main thing is not really the, booking an Airbnb, traveling to cities or any of that. I think the core point is having an open and flexible mind, like being able to admit if something isn't working, and you're also drained of the creativity, you're also drained of energy, you're also drained of motivation. A lot of times over the past 20 years, a lot of founders have asked me, Steli, should I keep going? Should I or not with this thing, right? We have some traction, but not enough. When is the right moment to decide to kill this or not kill this? And I tell people it's hard to say generically for everybody, but what's always going to be true is that if your energy and motivation and belief is not at a super high level every day, right? If, maybe in the beginning you have 80% conviction, 20% of the time you might have some doubt, right? You might have some worry. You might have some, maybe this is not going to work out. If that ratio switches, which is what it did for me with my first startup, where 80% of the time now you're drained and you're worried and you're fearful and you don't quite see it anymore, that success, but only 20% of the time you have a meeting or something that happens that really energizes you, that's not going to be enough internal energy to do the work necessary to make a startup successful. So I'll often tell people, if you are not pumped, if your internal batteries are not filling up every day with enthusiasm for this, then it's time to move on, right? That no matter what the traction is, you're not going to have the energy necessary to make something really happen. And you have to be really honest with yourself, which is really difficult to do. But you also need to have a certain level of flexibility and open-mindedness. You can't just decide this is the idea and then think that you're going to make it happen just by pure will and force and dedication. Those things are all these things are important, but they're not the only things that are important.
So it sounds like you were reluctant to get to that point that your co-founders Anthony and Tom got to first, which is, we're sick of this idea, we want a new idea. And that kind of happened again later, right? With you start Elastic Sales, you see some traction with Elastic Sales, and that was more of a sales as a service business. But as you were, servicing all of these Silicon Valley startups, you built a sort of internal software for it. And it was your own CRM because you weren't happy with any of the other CRMs on the market. And so you decided, if I have to sell all day for these startups, I don't want to use this shitty software. I want to use something really good. Let's build something for us. And so the product, that doesn't have a name yet. It's just your superstar secret sauce CRM. And people at your company start showing it off, sort of bragging about it to other Silicon Valley founders and salespeople, and they're like, hey, look at this tool we have, like, you don't get to use this, but we do. It's so slick, it's so cool. Suddenly that sort of accidentally creates this demand that you didn't expect, of people being like, well, I want that CRM. I want the secret sauce CRM that they have over at Elastic. And people start sort of chirping in your ear at that point, like, hey, should we sell the CRM instead of being a services business? But you were reluctant. Can you talk to me about that?
So usually founders lean on one end of the spectrum. Either they're too trigger happy on changing their plans and their ideas, either because some investor or some outside influence tells them, hey, you know what you should do? You should do this totally different thing. And they just hop from idea to idea without anybody sort of firmly grasping the wheel and sort of in charge of the future and the direction of the company. That was usually not my problem and my weakness as a founder. But I had the opposite one, where it's like, I'm so committed and so dedicated that I'm not gonna just switch because it's hard, right? I'm not gonna just let go or give up on something because it isn't working immediately. In this case, it was a different reason why I was reluctant to change. Now, we were running this sort of agency of sorts, outsourced, business. It was very complicated to scale a sales force. We were doing sales for so many different companies, running so many different campaigns, hiring people, onboarding, training them. A lot of moving parts, a lot of humans. And during that entire time, I'm trying to see if I can fundraise to scale that even further. And during that time, when we first started, we knew that we would build software, and sort of we had a vague idea that software maybe one day will be our secret sauce, or the thing that really helps us scale, out compete competitors. But we didn't really have much more than that, and some core ideas that I had about why other CRMs sucked and what we needed to do from day one to make our product better. Having calling embedded in the CRM so I can make and receive calls in the CRM, don't have to use a different software to do that, was one of the innovations that we brought to the table. One of the ideas that I had, or the things that I demanded as an end user. There were a couple of other things like that. It took us about a year or so of iterating on the software and sort of growing. And then slowly we started developing a real point of view. What is great sales software and what isn't? And what is the sales software that we are building and what is it not? And slowly but surely, the internal excitement for the product grew, just as some of our clients' excitement grew for the software that we were using. So we started really thinking, maybe we got something really special here. Maybe the future of the business is not going to be sort of the outsourced sales portion, but really the software that we developed. But I was overwhelmed, overworked, sort of like drowning in all the projects and all the things I was trying to keep together, clients, this, that, and the other. A lot was going on, a lot of campaigns, a lot of things. And when Phil, who is still, running product and engineering at Close, who was sort of, there in the founding days of the company, when he started, pushing me on this and going, we really should launch the software as a separate product, as a SaaS product, and we should do it soon. It's great. There's no reason to waste time and wait for some future moment that's ideal. We should do it now. I resisted it mainly because I didn't want to, like, the last thing I wanted to do is start a second company, right? Like, I just felt that the timing wasn't right because I felt overwhelmed because I had too much work, too many things going on. And I thought, I don't have it in me to now launch a separate thing and run two businesses, basically. And so I would typically tell him, yes, I kind of agree, but right now is not the time. And then he kept bringing it up, right? He's at lunches, at dinners, at breakfast, at coffee meetings, at stand-up meetings, at any opportunity. Phil kept going, well, but I really think, or he would say, oh, yet another client who really wants the software, I really think we should launch the software. I remember once going to the bathroom and accidentally he was there as well. And he started pitching me on that we have to launch the software, the CRM right now. And
That's such a Hollywood moment.
yeah. And he for an engineer, he soaked up too much sales knowledge too quickly. And he became very dangerous. And he was very persistent. And I always say the person in the room with the highest level of clarity usually wins. I was less clear that I didn't want to launch the product right now than he was clear that it had to be launched right now. So he just kept chipping away at me until one day I just, lost it. And I went, all right, asshole, you take 5 people, go into that office, and then in 3 months, launch the product. And I don't want to hear anything about it. I'm going to be running this other side of the business, launch the product, and then we'll see how it goes. And he just turned around and he grabbed the engineering team. He grabbed one non-engineer from our team, Nick Persick, who is still with the company today, and was like, all right, Nick, you do, I don't know, you do the landing page, you do the email setup, you set up our blog, you do support, you do sales, you do everything. You'll be a customer facing person. And then the rest of us, they had to reboot Close as an internal piece of software to be able to be an external piece of software. So as a simple example, there was no way for somebody to sign up and create an account on a website, right? Like when we hired a new rep, the engineer in the backend just like, typed in their name and everything and created an account for them. So some of the simplest things just didn't exist because we were not a public facing product. And so they had to rebuild a bunch of components of Close, in the process, fixing some things that they thought, were lame about it. And I mean, we spent like a morning to put together a landing page. The name Close.io, I don't even remember being involved in this. Like I don't know who came up with the idea. I don't know who picked the domain. All that happened in a little bubble while I was keeping together the 40 plus person
That's
outsourced
amazing.
sales team. And then we launched, and I was writing articles for a bunch of big tech outlets during that time. So we had amassed a little bit of an audience and a little bit of a reputation in Silicon Valley. So I had a big list of people that knew about me, that I'm a sales expert, and we are doing some cool stuff with sales. So we were able to email a bunch of people. I blogged about this or posted a couple of articles on some important outlets to kickstart things. But we launched in January 2013, and it was an excellent decision to launch the product as early as we did. I wish we had done it even earlier. Phil was absolutely right. I was absolutely wrong. And left to my own devices, who knows if and when I would have ever launched our internal CRM. So all the glory goes to other people in the company. But the reason at that time that I was reluctant was not the product. Like I knew we had something here and I thought that could be the future. It was just that I was so overwhelmed with running one side of the business that I just felt like, I don't know if I can do this. And then I didn't have to. The team just decided, we don't need you to do this. You keep doing what you're doing. We'll do this. And they did very successfully.
And Phil is still here. He's your VP of engineering, right? Yeah, he's still
Yeah.
here making decisions. I mean, that's a hell of a risk for him to be badgering the CEO constantly. I mean, I think there's a few lessons here. Number one, if it's a great idea, be persistent. And number two, it's if you're a CEO feeling overwhelmed or, just get out of the way and let other people prove you wrong. Like, I think there's a certain amount of humility that you kind of learn over time with that. So what then do you tell founders who are reluctant for one reason or another, no matter the reason? Because the idea of pivoting it can be really hard to swallow for founders. It's sort of like the devil you know versus the devil you don't, and which one is going to be worse. And sometimes that startup is like their baby. So, what pep talk do you give to founders who are reluctant to pivot or evolve the business?
Well, first of all, I tell people that your startup isn't your baby, right? It really isn't. Um, you need to be way more pragmatic about things. Yes, you want to be dedicated. Yes, you want to be focused. Yes, you want to be serious, but you have to realize that you're going to have to be flexible and open minded, and that ultimately building a business is a dance between many parties. This is not something that you can just in a lab make happen and make successful. It is going to be a partnership between customers and you, right? And oftentimes it's not really a partnership. It's they're the bosses and you're servicing them. You're
Hmm.
serving them. And so, there's this old saying that's very true, that no business plan, but this translates to no idea ever survives first contact with reality, right? So when you go out there in the real world and you build the real thing and you have real users use it and you have the real world change, things will constantly evolve and change around you. That's just a reality. You'll have to learn to be adaptable. It's not the strongest, the biggest that win. It's the most adaptable that survive in nature. And this is also true in business. You have to be adaptable, and that needs a certain level of flexibility in your thinking. Um, so when founders are reluctant to pivot because reasons, oh, we're just about to close this big partnership, or we just invested all this time in this new feature, or whatever reason that's really internally focused, like I really love this idea, or I spent so much time building this, or I am very excited about this thing now, I tell them that it doesn't matter, right? Like what is the world telling you? What's life telling you? Life never lies, right? Are you really seeing a huge uptick in users? Are you seeing a huge uptick in customers? Did you close a deal and people wire money? Or is it wishful thinking? And if it's wishful
Hmm.
thinking, you have to decide, do you want to be a real business owner, a real founder and build something real? Or do you want to daydream or be a founder as a hobby, as a lifestyle? And if you want it as a lifestyle, do it on the side as a hobby and make your main income come from somewhere else. And then you can just daydream all day long about what you love to do. But if it's supposed to be a real business, and if the market is telling you no, if customers are telling you no, if users are telling you no, if you don't see success, you'll have to be open minded and look for opportunities elsewhere to serve customers and to find success. So I tell founders usually this isn't about you as much as you think. This isn't your baby as much as you think. You'll have to find the balance between being dedicated but also pragmatic and open minded.
I love that. Yeah, that I think that's advice that a lot of people need to hear. Let's pivot out of here, Steli. Thank you once again for joining me and telling me all your stories. Bye, everybody.